episode of Pokémon Generations, we go to the 6th generations of games to the Kalos region, where we are formally introduced to the main villain of that game, Lysandre, otherwise known as Creepy Pokemon Steve Jobs. I'm going to be very brief with you. This episode did not do it for me, for a number of reasons. One, there was barely any Pokemon battling in this episode whatsoever. It was basically just watching Lysandre be all evil and look like an Irish Wolverine. The episode opens up with him giving this big presentation to this crowd of people, introducing the Holocaster, which was an important item in X and Y that I don't think anyone even cared about. I mean, they didn't even bring it back for Sun and Moon, so it's not really that big of a deal. Essentially, it's just the ability to create a hologram of yourself, and he demonstrates that by bringing out this Pyroar onto the stage, which uses its flamethrower attack against Lysandre, seemingly killing him in front of the entire crowd, when he just sort of slyly walks out and he's like, "Hey, no big deal, that was just a hologram. Pick it up at your local Apple store." Probably the most interesting scene of this episode, and without a doubt the most mellow, was when Lysandre was having a cup of tea with Diantha, the champion of the Kalos region, and we get to see that their philosophies are very different from one another, with Diantha accepting the fact that she eventually will age, and she's going to use that to her advantage to become a better actor as she goes on into her career, whereas Lysandre sort of lives in the moment and appreciates beauty, but he realizes that over time, this beauty will degrade, so he'd much rather just destroy everything so that way it can always be remembered for its absolute peak. Essentially, he's like freaking Deidara from the Naruto Shippuden anime series, except a lot goofier looking. The rest of the episode is pretty much about how the Kalos region just gets completely obsessed with a Holocaster and they're just loving everything that Lysandre is throwing their way. We even get to see some members of the Elite Four at the very end of the episode, but really that's just about it. It all ends with Lysandre getting ready to realize his plan for Project Y, where he's going to use the evil Yveltal to essentially just destroy everything on the planet, which is like the motive of pretty much 90% of all the Pokemon villains from the series. And that's where the episode ends. You don't even get a big full shot of Yveltal. It's just this really super up-close shot of its face. Missed opportunity, I think. Maybe in the next episode we'll actually get to see Yveltal, maybe even Xerneas in action, but I have a feeling that's not going to happen. If anything, if they're smart and they want to continue to promote Sun and Moon, the next 2 episodes will focus on the Alola region, which honestly I want to see, because I want to see how Pokemon Generations is going to differentiate itself from the current Pokemon Sun and Moon anime. This will be the perfect opportunity to do that, and it'll be a testbed for the possibility of more Pokemon anime like this in the future. So what's the rundown on this week's episode of Pokemon Generations? Like I said, I just found myself being bored by this episode. I was never really that big a fan of Team Flare from the Pokemon video games, mostly just because their plan was just so stock. They were just such standard villains, especially Lysandre himself, who honestly I thought was a lot more grandiose in the regular Pokemon X, Y, and Z anime series. Here, he just comes across as a really savvy businessman who looks like he's going to a freaking cosplay convention. And that and the fact that there was barely any Pokemon in this episode. I watch Pokemon to see the Pokemon, not the freaking humans. The humans complement them. They should be in the background, especially in a freaking short animated series. These episodes are 4 minutes long and you barely have any time to digest that information. You just have to take it for what it is. And when they just shove humans in your face for 4 minutes, it's kind of boring. Really, the only scene that I liked from this episode was the Pyroar scene, and essentially that was just a setup to introduce Lysandre and his stupid Holocaster. Really, that's all I have to say about this one. I don't want to beat a horse to death. It wasn't a terrible episode by any stretch of the means, and it was still a very nice-looking episode. The animation, the artwork, everything looked pretty damn great, and is it just me, or did Diantha get 20 times sexier in this version? I don't know. It was still an okay episode, but I can really only recommend this one to the most hardcore of Pokemon fans, especially those who play the games religiously, as you're going to be the only one who's going to be able to really get all of the details and cues from this episode. There's not enough development for you to get attached to these characters, and that's why they should have spent the episode with a cool Pokemon battle instead. Give us an excuse for great animation, not the beginnings of an anime that's never going to be finished. That's just my opinion on it. So, I'm going to give this episode right here a 3 out of 5. Just another average episode of Pokemon Generations, but we still have a couple episodes left, and they might be able to rectify that. We're just going to have to wait and see what they're going to do. But you heard my thoughts on this week's episode, and I want to hear yours. What did you think of this week's episode of Pokemon Generations? Are you a fan of the character of Lysandre? Did you like the X and Y Pokemon games? What do you want to see from the rest of Pokemon Generations? Please tell me in the comment section below. Thank you guys so much for watching this review. I really appreciate it. Make sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel. I will see you next time. And as always, stay dandy, baby.